What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have breaking news as we record. We are about an hour into the new league year for the National Football League, and Calvin Ridley is signed and is not by the Patriots. By now, you probably know he's been signed by the Tennessee Titans, swooping in, stealing Ridley from both the Jaguars and the Patriots. The Patriots' interest in Calvin Ridley was real. We know that. They love the versatility. They love the fact that he brought enough in the way of juice that he would give opposing defenses and defensive coordinators something to think about. We know that they want to build a better receiver room around the quarterback situation, however that fully forms over the course of the next few months. This is something that, in my opinion, should have been a priority for the Patriots, and it appears as though they tried to make it a priority, but they clearly didn't do enough. Is that because they didn't offer enough? Did they have the best offer on the table when it came to the finances of it? And Ridley simply said, I ain't going to New England? We don't know that just yet. It's too early in the process now, but those are questions we will effort to answer. And however they're answered, it's fascinating to me. Because if it's simply that I ain't going to New England, that's a problem for the Patriots. That is the tax that we have spoken about on many occasions, both on this podcast and the Patriots Talk podcast, as well as our shows. Early edition Boston Sports Tonight. Northeast, bad weather, no quarterback answer, really, right now, outside of Jacoby Brissett, who's in town, and whatever happens with the number 3 overall pick, potentially, and a bad team over the course of the last few years. You don't have that draw of being a championship caliber club the way you did for so long. So free agents, for some of them at least, it's going to take a lot to draw them here. And again, the Patriots didn't have enough to be able to draw Calvin Ridley here. We'll try to find out what that offer was. We will see soon, I'm sure, the numbers on Calvin Ridley and how much he'll be making with the Tennessee Titans. But he was the best receiver on the market. He could do a little bit of everything, play inside, play outside. He would have made whoever your next quarterback was, that person's life much, much easier. Now what do? There are alternatives. They're not as good as Calvin Ridley, but there are alternatives. Mike Williams was released by the Chargers today, first day of the new league year, in order to clear up some cap space. That's a true X, a little bit different than Ridley. Ridley's a do-everything guy. He's probably more of your quote-unquote Z. Mike Williams is a boundary guy, down the field, contested catches. You're twitching out there, I'm sure of it, because in your eyes, I am describing Devontae Parker right now. He's essentially a better version. He's more explosive. I think he's better in those 50-50 situations. Devontae Parker now obviously gone and out of the Patriots receiver room. Again, that's a positive sign. The fact that they're in on Calvin Ridley, though they didn't get him, it at least tells you that they want to invest at this position and invest, a significant chunk of change in this position because they know how important it is. So they miss out on Ridley. The numbers are coming in courtesy of the skull crusher John Henry right now. 4 years, $92 million with $50 million fully guaranteed. Woo! We'll see how much of that 92 is realistic for Ridley to realize. But $50 million fully guaranteed is a pretty good deal over the course of a 4-year period for a guy who is 30 years old. Patriots should have offered something similar. As much as it is. Their receiver room is that bad, and he is that good. To me, he's a top 20-ish receiver in the league, especially if you use him right. Jags, in my opinion, really didn't. They had him on the outside, fades, curls, posts. He's not an X and an X alone. Allow him to be a route runner. Allow him to show off that nuance that he has in terms of his style playing the position. Be that as it may, he's not coming to New England. So what do the Patriots do next? Just mentioned Mike Williams. Hollywood Brown is still out there. I don't love that option, although he does give you some speed and some legitimate speed, better than Tyquan Thornton. Tyquan Thornton has no reputation. He has nothing on tape that would scare a defense, period, point blank. Hollywood Brown has at least done a little something in this league. And so maybe a safety does have to shade over the top. Maybe you do have to pull a body out of the box to make the run game a little bit more palatable an option for the Patriots offense on a snap-to-snap basis. So he would be an upgrade, Hollywood Brown would. To me, the obvious place to invest is in the draft. And that's where we're going to go with this conversation that we're going to play for you right now. One of the best conversations we have at the Combine every single year. It's Mike Renner. He knows the draft front and back, receivers, quarterbacks, linemen, whatever position of need that the Patriots have, he's all over it. He's all over every single position. So we're going to get to this conversation right now with Mike because he gets into some of the receivers who could be available to the Patriots at 34 overall. There's a lot of talk about the guys at the very top of the draft, and I understand that. We love Rome Odunze here. Friend of the podcast, Rome Odunze. Marvin Harrison Jr., tremendous player. Malik Neighbors might end up being the first receiver taken in this year's draft. There are NFL people, out there that I've spoken to who prefer Neighbors to Harrison, believe it or not, because of the explosive speed, because of the yards after the catch playmaking ability that Neighbors clearly has. But Mike's going to get into some of the tier 2 names with us, some of these guys that could be available at 34 overall. Tremendous conversation, as I already mentioned. We're in Indianapolis for the Combine. This is from a couple of weeks ago, but the content is as fresh as ever. So we present to you that content right now. Excited now to have with us on the Next Pats podcast, friend of the Next Pats podcast, Mike Renner. Mike, thanks for being with us, man.
Dude, thanks for having me on.
The Patriots are in a weird spot. They're a bad team. The roster might have on offense 2 or 3 good players. One's probably a guard, one's probably a center, and one's maybe a slot receiver who has a hard time staying on the field. What do you do at 3 overall? And I actually want to ask you, because you're so in on the quarterbacks, you're in on the receivers, you're in on everything. What's the best pairing for them, first and second round? They have that high second rounder, 34th overall. If you're the general manager, who are the 2 best players you're hoping to come away with?
So I'm really worried at number 3 if you go quarterback. And it's a good quarterback class. You know, someone like Jayden Daniels is obviously getting mocked there a ton. Like, I think he's a good prospect. I'm really worried of kind of like a Bryce Young situation here, though, where you put a guy with no talent around him and you could be drafting number 1 overall again next year. And then say there's a guy who really breaks out and you have another, maybe a generational quarterback prospect. I don't see one necessarily, but one happens. You're in a really weird spot as the New England Patriots then. So I'm of the opinion that someone will want that number 3 overall pick. And with that roster as it is, I would try to get a haul for it and then go O-line. Because this, obviously, your 2 best O-line from last year are free agents right now. Who knows if they'll be re-signed. It's just a great O-line class. Just, start rebuilding it correctly. Put the situation in place for whoever is going to be your quarterback in the future. So I would love to trade down to maybe like 8 for the Falcons and get like an Olu Fashanu from Penn State. Get a bookend tackle, franchise tackle for like the next 10 years. Have that piece in place. And then you get, maybe a future first rounder for that. And you get in the second round in this deep wide receiver class, you can maybe even get a number 1 type of wide receiver in the second. Someone like Adonai Mitchell from Texas, someone like Keon Coleman from Florida State. Those guys could be on the board. To me, if you get a number 1 wide receiver and a number 1 OT, it's not going to change your fortunes overnight the way hitting on a quarterback would. But I just worry if you draft one of the quarterbacks in this class, he's going to such a bad situation that there's no looking like C.J. Stroud no matter who it is that you draft.
Boy, when you bring up Bryce Young as a potential outcome for next year for whoever the Patriots quarterback is, I think that probably makes people at home really nervous. But it's an argument for taking the approach that you're suggesting here. You mentioned a couple of receivers there. Before I dig in a little bit deeper on quarterbacks, can you tell us, like, those guys, Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, what kinds of receivers are we talking about there? I don't know how comfortable you are making comps right now.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The comps,
I can throw some comps
set the social media world ablaze sometimes, but who would be good comps for those guys that you mentioned?
So to me, Keon Coleman reminds me a lot of Michael Thomas for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, injuries derailed his career, but he was like a 100-catch, 1,400-yard guy, a possession type of wide receiver, a guy that you can rely on third downs to just run that slant, get open, move the chain sort of guy. So Adonai Mitchell is more of like a high-end sort of mover, a guy with potential who's not as polished as Keon Coleman. Maybe like an Allen Robinson is what you're looking at there. But it's such a good wide receiver class. And you've seen in recent years that top of the second round, whether it's T. Higgins, whether it's Michael Pittman, it's just a great place to still find number 1 type of wide receiver. So I think in this class especially, they'll have a good guy on the board for them.
Troy Franklin, are you a fan of his out of Oregon? It looks like he might be one of the faster receivers in this year's class. The only reason I bring him up is because I do see him as sort of a back end of the first, maybe top of the second type of player. And Elliot Wolf, the de facto GM in New England now, is talking about weaponizing the offense. And to me, they need to get more explosive. Is he the kind of explosive threat that they could use?
He's definitely explosive. It's also, you draft him, though, you're kind of like giving up on Tyquan Thornton. They're the same style of wide receiver, I'll say.
I think he'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at this point in his career to say that. But he's a much better version of that. He's a much more complete wide receiver than Tyquan Thornton's ever been. So he's definitely a guy that adds explosiveness to a room that, I mean, let's face it, hasn't explosiveness in like a decade at this point.
Also a thin guy, though, like
thin.
Thornton.
Yep, thin. So that's why in this class, like I mentioned Coleman and Adonai, because those are guys that have like number one type of tools. You know, like could be that guy. Whereas Franklin, I just don't see at 100. He's got 6'3", 185 is like skinny. That's always going to be kind of complimentary deep threat guy.
Let's dig in on the quarterbacks a little bit, because you don't love QB3.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's Jayden Daniels. But what if, say, the Commanders fall in love with Daniels and he ends up going second? You have been a fan of Drake Maye. We talked to you months ago, Mike, and you had Drake Maye actually ranked ahead of Caleb Williams. Do you still feel that way? And if he's there at 3, should the Patriots jump?
To me, they're 1A, 1B in terms of like what do you want to do offensively. I think Williams has the higher ceiling. I think Maye has a little bit higher floor. I think just seeing him on tape and seeing how natural he is at the position, it reminds me a lot of Jordan Love, just in terms of like he's an athlete. He'll figure it out. I bet on those guys with the big arms, the guys that can move, the guys that can throw from any platform. If they just like tighten up the way Jordan Love did over the course of his career, obviously tighten up his mechanics, tighten up his footwork, that guy has a really high ceiling. So I'm a big fan of his. And again, if he's on the board at 3, that kind of changes the calculus for me because I see him as a number 1 overall type of prospect, whereas Jayden Daniels, I'm not quite as on board.
Do you like the projection for Maye if he has to play right away? The nice thing for Jordan Love is Aaron Rodgers is already on the roster.
Yeah, exactly.
He gets to sit and marinate for 3 years in New England. Maybe they would try to do that, but they obviously don't have that QB1 that's already on the roster.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, for both Caleb Williams and Drake Maye, I would rather give them a redshirt year. I think that's a very just shrewd long-term move that you see work out more often than not. The guys that like truly get that year to just acclimate to the speed of the NFL, it's so beneficial. There's just such a strong track record of those guys. So ideally you could do that, but it's not realistic, right? It's going to happen. Whoever they draft is going to start right away. So ideally you would want that to happen, but if you throw them behind there, it could be tough. This is why I keep saying, like, at number 3 with this roster, whoever is the quarterback behind that could be rough, and you could be looking in the same spot next year.
Is there a low-end comp for Drake Maye? Because I heard a relatively scary one, I think, for Patriots fans out there recently, which was Drew Lock, who had a big arm at Missouri and had some athleticism. And you just, if there's the potential for that, that's scary at number 3 overall.
Yeah, I think so. The thing about Drew Lock was that Missouri offense coming out was all outside the numbers. It was kind of like this go balls, hitches on the outside. The thing that Maye does that I'm like so high on him for is he works the middle of the football field. At the collegiate level, you don't see a lot of guys doing that, and he's just like between that linebacker and the safety. It's a learned skill. It's hard to see windows there because they're not really the same windows as they are on the outside because you have guys in your vision, right? There are guys that are there. You almost have to anticipate them. And so him doing that already at such a high level on his tape, it's why I said he's one of the highest floor quarterback prospects in this class and why I'm a big fan of this game.
You're a Wisconsin guy. Have
Yes,
followed the Packers very closely for a long time. The Patriots now have Elliott Wolf again running things. He is a subscriber to the Packer way, quote unquote. Knowing that, does that impact how you think they might handle this year's draft in terms of what positions they invest in, how willing they would be to sit a number 3 overall pick at quarterback if they think it's the right thing to do? How might the Packer way show up in New England, you think?
I think it's good in terms of it's not going to be a draft someone for right now. The Packers have never been, we have a need here, we have to fill it. And that's, the draft is a long-term investment. It should always be treated as that, and that's why the Patriots have been so successful is because they've always treated it as not a guy we need right now. It's a guy we need for the year 3 and year 4 in his rookie contract. So I think you're going to see that, and I think you'll also see a propensity to trade down. Obviously, Bill Belichick had that too, but I think that'll continue in terms of just like get value wherever you can and get as many players. So I think you'll see a lot of picks this year just because you have a roster that needs it, frankly.
Man, and the Packers, it looks like, from an outsider's perspective, premium positions in the first round, meaning quarterback, tackle, pass rusher. Elliott Wolf, when he was in Cleveland, was part of a staff. He was the number 2 on the staff that drafted Baker Mayfield and then Denzel Ward, so maybe corner is somewhere in there. Jair Alexander is, I guess, maybe a recent example of a first-round pick at corner in Green Bay. Not usually receiver, though, right? Receiver is something they typically wait on. So should Patriots fans, if they do trade back, like you're suggesting, maybe kind of punt on that idea that they end up with a top receiver?
If they trade back, they're going OT, in my opinion. Like that's where they would go, because you just look at the top OTs around the NFL. They are first-round picks. You can identify the athletes that succeed at that position, whereas wide receivers, day two, still fruitful. I mean, Packers have made a killing off of second and third round wide receivers over the course. Like that entire, back when they had Aaron Rodgers at his peak, whether it was Jordy Nelson, whether it was Greg Jennings, those guys were second round.
Devontae Adams,
second rounder. Like, you don't necessarily need premium picks to get premium wide receivers. It's just a position that they fall down the board, and especially in this class. So that top of the second round is going to be a real nice spot for them for this wide receiver class.
Last thing I want to ask you. You mentioned Olu Fashanu already. Seems like a really talented guy at that tackle spot. Are there others who would be in that range? So say they trade back with the Falcons at 8, or it's the Commanders at 11, or it's Vegas at 13. Like, who might they end up with? Who are the best players at that position there, in your opinion?
So the other two guys that I would take at that spot are Talias Fuaga from Oregon State, right tackle, super powerful dude, one of the best run blockers. I mean, he fits like what the Patriots kind of used to do. We'll see how they change offensively, but like definitely a guy who looks like a Patriot. And then Amarius Mims from Georgia, obviously strong Georgia connections to the Patriots over the years. And he's just a physical freak. We'll see it on the combine. This 6'7", 340. Hasn't played a ton of football, but that guy's a special athlete. So those are the two guys. Like, it's a real good tackle class. So really any of those top group, you can't really go wrong with.
It's good news for the Patriots. Mike Renner, one of the biggest brains on the planet when it comes to the NFL draft. Thanks for being with us, bud.
Thanks for having me. That's high praise.
Great stuff there from Mike, and I understand it if you're still reeling from the Calvin Ridley to Tennessee news. Calvin Ridley to Tennessee. Do we kill the Patriots for not doing enough to get him here? I'm not. I won't yet until we understand a little bit better the details. If they're way off, if they're not even close, if they're at 30 million fully guaranteed and the Titans are at 50, that to me is a problem. Again, because I look at it as an investment, not only in the player himself. This is not an investment in a vacuum, strictly for the individual. This would be an investment in your overall operation. This would be an investment in your team. This would be an investment in your ability to compete and to make your young quarterback, which I assume is what the Patriots will have in 2024, make the life of your young quarterback much, much easier. Give him a go-to guy. I don't know who that is right now. I guess it's Hunter Henry in the short to intermediate range. Pop Douglas, I really like, and I have for a long time. If you listen to this podcast, you know that. 4th in the league this year, by the way, among qualifying receivers in terms of yards after the catch per reception. That guy can play. Can he stay on the field consistently? TBD. He's undersized. He's been banged up as a rookie. But outside of Hunter Henry and Demario Douglas, I'm not sure where you're going in terms of encouraging news on the pass catcher front for New England. I like Antonio Gibson as a third down back. I like Ramondre Stevenson as somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield. I loved what Kendrick Bourne did the first half of last year. He's coming off a major injury, and I'm not sure when he's going to be fully ready. Disappointing news for the Patriots, who are near the top of the league in terms of cap space available, not to be able to get the best receiver available in this year's free agent class. Now, the Titans, they had money to play with as well, but that's not a contending team. Who's playing quarterback for them? Will Levis? So you should have been able to compete in that regard. Maybe it strictly comes down to location for Calvin Ridley. Maybe he would much rather be in Tennessee or Jacksonville than the Northeast. Could completely see that being a factor. But you would like to think that with all the resources the Patriots had, if they really needed to blow a player out of the water, and to me, Calvin Ridley is a top 20-ish receiver in the NFL right now, and worthy of being blown out of the water for a team that has so many questions at the receiver spot. You would have liked to see the Patriots make that move. Again, maybe they had the same offer on the table, and he simply chose the Titans. We'll try to find out for you, the people, because I'm sure you're curious as well. But now the Patriots need to figure out what comes next. Quite frankly, we've talked about veteran options. We've talked about draft options at the position. Now that Ridley's off the board, the Patriots need one of each. They need two, in my opinion, starting caliber wide receivers to add to this team. You can't depend on the draft for that. You should be dipping into some sort of veteran, very capable, proven veteran who can give you some explosive playmaking ability, weaponize the offense. That's what Elliott Wolf told us he was going to do at this year's combine, right? Or at least that's what they wanted to do. Weaponize the offense with a Mike Williams and a pick at the top of the second round. with a Hollywood Brown, maybe, I guess, okay. And then try to get your true number one at the top of the second round, maybe even trade up to the back half of the first and get your guy there. We'll see what the Patriots do at the position, but there is work to be done now that we know Ridley's off the board and he is not coming to Foxborough. Thanks everybody for listening to this edition of the Next Pats podcast. We will have plenty more. We have plenty more phenomenal conversations with people like Mike Renner, people of his ilk who are all over the draft, all over free agency as well. We'll continue to hammer you with content. Please keep an eye out for the next Pats podcast. Rate, comment, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you're checking us out there. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you next time.